The morning I discovered the money was gone, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a bank statement I had nearly thrown away thinking it was junk mail. I had been receiving VA pension deposits to that account for 17 years. Every month, the same amount. Every month, I trusted it was there. When I finally opened the envelope and saw the balance, I sat perfectly still for a long moment. The account had been drained over 8 years. Slowly, carefully. By someone who knew exactly how much I received and exactly when it arrived. By someone whose name I saw printed on the withdrawal line next to my own. My son's name. His name is Thomas. He is 39 years old. He was the person I trusted most in this world, and he had been stealing from me for nearly a decade. What makes this more than a family tragedy is that it is not rare. Every year, hundreds of millions of dollars in veterans' benefits are stolen, and in the majority of cases, the thief is not a stranger. It is a son, a daughter, a caregiver, someone the veteran depends on. I am one of the lucky ones because I found out while I still had time to do something about it. And what I did next would tear my family apart and reveal something I never expected. My name is William Carver. I am 67 years old. For 28 of those years, I woke every morning before dawn and put on the uniform of the United States Navy. I served 2 tours in Vietnam, spending months on the deck of the USS Kitty Hawk with the sound of jet engines so loud it would rattle your teeth. I came home in 1972 with a limp that never quite healed and a ringing in my ears that never stopped. But I never complained. That was not how I was raised. I married Linda in 1976. We had one child, a son we named Thomas. He was a bright boy, curious and kind. Linda passed away 8 years ago from ovarian cancer that moved faster than any doctor expected. After the funeral, Thomas sat with me in this same kitchen and said, "Dad, I want to help. Let me take care of things for a while." He meant the bills, the paperwork, the endless forms that seemed to multiply after a death. I was grateful. I was grieving. I said yes. Looking back, that was the moment, not the moment he decided to steal from me. I believe that came later, but the moment I handed him the key, I did not see it that way at the time. I saw a son stepping up. I saw what I wanted to see. Thomas was 30 years old then. He had just gone through a difficult divorce and had moved back into the house for what we both called a temporary arrangement. He got me set up with a new bank account, one that made it easier for him to manage the automatic payments from my Navy pension and my VA disability compensation. I had been rated 70% disabled due to hearing loss and a condition the doctors called post-traumatic stress. The monthly deposit was $1,643. It came on the first of each month, like clockwork. I never worried about it. Thomas told me everything was in order. He also set up a joint account where my Social Security went, about $1,400 a month. He used that to pay the electric bill, the water, the property taxes. He would give me a summary every few months. I rarely looked closely. He was my son. I trusted him. The next several years, my life settled into a quiet pattern. I drove my old Ford pickup to the grocery store. I worked in the garden that Linda had planted. I watched the news in the evenings. Thomas came and went. He got a new job. He started dating again. He seemed happy. I did not ask too many questions. That was my nature. I was the kind of man who believed that trust was earned once and never needed re-examination. That belief was about to cost me everything. Then 3 years ago, a small thing happened. The roof over the garage started leaking. I called a contractor who gave me an estimate of $6,000. I told Thomas I would need to pull that amount from the savings. He paused. He said, "Let me check the accounts, Dad. I'll get back to you." He came back the next day with a number that did not sound right. He said we had about $8,000 total in the savings account. I had been depositing my VA check into that account for years, and I had rarely spent from it. I did the math quietly in my head. $1,600 a month for 12 months times several years. Even accounting for some withdrawals, there should have been far more. I did not say anything that night. I told Thomas I would think about the roof. But the next morning, I drove to the bank myself. I sat down with a teller and asked for the full transaction history on every account with my name on it. The teller printed out pages and pages. I brought them home and spread them on the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold before I touched it. There were accounts I did not recognize. There were transfers to a separate checking account that bore only Thomas's name. There were withdrawals labeled cash for amounts I never would have authorized. I saw that the direct deposit from the VA had been changed 2 years before to a different account entirely, one I had never seen. The account I thought was my savings was actually a decoy, a shell with just enough money to make me think everything was fine. I sat there for a long time. I thought about Linda. I thought about the boy who used to sit on my lap and ask me to tell him stories about the aircraft carrier. I thought about how long this had been going on and how I had not seen it. Then I found the letter. It was tucked into the back of a stack of bank statements the teller had given me. A letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs, dated 3 years earlier, addressed to me at this house. The letter stated that a request had been made to change my direct deposit information to a new bank account. It asked me to confirm the change within 10 business days, or it would go through automatically. If I had not authorized this, I was to call immediately. I had never seen this letter. I had never been told about any change. Someone had intercepted it. Someone had kept it from me. I knew who, and as I sat there with that letter in my hand, I understood that what had happened to me was not just theft. It was systematic. It was patient. It was the dismantling of everything I had built, carried out by the person I had trusted most in the world. I did not call the VA right away. I did not call the police. I did not confront Thomas. I knew that if I did any of those things, he would cover his tracks. So I did something that went against every instinct I had. I went silent. I started watching. And the more I watched, the more I found. I thought I had discovered the full extent of his betrayal. I was wrong. The worst was yet to come. I started with the bank statements, 3 years of transactions, printed on cheap paper that curled at the edges from the heat of my hands. The first thing I learned was that Thomas had not just taken money, he had restructured my entire financial identity around himself. The joint account I thought we shared was actually controlled by him. I was listed as a secondary user with view-only access for most of the online features. I had never set up online banking myself, so I never knew. He had managed it all. The second thing I learned was that the VA disability payments had been rerouted into an account opened in my name, but using an email address I did not recognize. The account had been opened from a computer IP address in a town 40 miles from here, in a neighborhood I had never visited. When I called the bank and asked for the signature card on file, they emailed me a scanned document. I recognized my son's handwriting. He had forged my signature, not poorly either. He had practiced. This was not impulse. This was not a man who saw an opportunity and grabbed it. This was architecture. He had built a system designed to funnel my benefits into his hands while leaving me just enough to stay quiet and comfortable. The leaky roof was the first crack. If that contractor had not given me that estimate, I might have lived another decade never knowing. I decided I needed to understand the full scope before I did anything. I did not want to confront him with half the picture and give him the chance to destroy evidence. So I became, for the first time in my life, someone who investigated his own son. I started pulling credit reports. I had never done that before. I had the same Visa card for 20 years, the same small-town bank, the same habits. When the reports came back, I saw credit cards I had never opened, one from a department store, another from a big national bank. Both had balances in the thousands. Both had my name and social security number attached. The billing addresses were post office boxes. The payments, when they were made, came from an account I had never seen. I called the credit card companies from the kitchen phone, my voice low even though I was alone. I told them I was William Carver and I needed to understand when these accounts were opened and what transactions had been made. One of the customer service agents, a young woman with a kind voice, said, "Mr. Carver, do you believe these accounts were opened fraudulently?" I paused. I almost said no, because saying yes would make it real. Then I said, "Yes, ma'am. I believe my son opened them in my name." There was a silence. Then she said, "I'm required to tell you that if you wish to dispute these charges, you'll need to file a police report and an identity theft affidavit." She walked me through the steps. I wrote them down on a notepad Linda used to keep by the phone for grocery lists. The paper still had her handwriting on the other side, a recipe for banana bread. I did not file the report that day. I told myself I was still gathering information. But the truth was, I was not ready to put my son's name on a police report. I was not ready to cross that line. So instead, I kept digging. I went to the county courthouse. I asked the clerk if there were any property records, liens, or judgments in my name that I should know about. She typed into her computer. Her expression changed. She said, "Mr. Carver, did you take out a home equity line of credit against your property?" My stomach dropped. I said I had not. She turned the screen toward me. There it was. A line of credit for $40,000 taken out 18 months earlier using my house as collateral. The document had been filed electronically. The signature on the digital form was my name, but the notary stamp was from a service in another county, one that I had never used. I sat down in the courthouse hallway on a wooden bench that had probably been there since the building was constructed. I thought about Linda. When we bought this house in 1978, we had scraped together every dollar. She had painted the kitchen herself 3 times because she could not find a shade of yellow she liked. She had planted the rose bushes along the front walk. She had said, "This house is ours, William. Nobody can take it from us." And now her son had used it as collateral for a loan I knew nothing about, on a line of credit that was probably already spent. I went home that evening and I sat in my truck in the driveway for a long time before I went inside. Thomas was there. He had made dinner. He was laughing at something on his phone. He said, "Hey Dad, rough day?" I said, "I'm just tired." I ate the chicken he had cooked, and I told him it was good, and I went upstairs early. That night I did not sleep. I lay in bed and I tried to understand what had happened to the boy I had raised. Thomas had been a good kid. He had played Little League. He had struggled in school a little, but he was not mean, not dishonest. When had it changed? Was it the divorce? Was it something I had missed? Was it something I had done? I could not answer any of those questions, so I turned back to the one thing I could do. I kept investigating. The next morning I called the VA directly, not the local office, but the National Fraud Hotline. I identified myself and I said, "I believe my benefits have been misdirected. I need to know where they've been going." The man on the other end, a veteran himself by the sound of him, transferred me to someone in the Inspector General's office. A woman named Mrs. Alvarez took my call. She asked me questions for 45 minutes, and I answered every one of them as precisely as I could. When I finished, she said, "Mr. Carver, what you're describing is not uncommon. We see this pattern regularly. Family members, caregivers, sometimes even attorneys. They take control of the benefits, and the veteran never knows until it's too late." She told me that the VA had recovered over $200 million in fraudulent benefits over the past several years, and that number was climbing. She said that in many cases, the thief was someone the veteran trusted implicitly. She said, "It's not your fault, Mr. Carver. The people who do this are skilled at it. They manipulate trust. It's the most effective tool they have." I asked her what would happen if I pursued this officially. She said the VA would open an investigation. They would subpoena bank records, interview witnesses, and if the evidence supported it, they would refer the case for federal prosecution. She said the penalties could include prison time and fines up to $250,000. She also said that once the process started, I could not stop it. The government would decide whether to prosecute, not me. I thanked her and hung up. I had one more thing I needed to find, something I suspected but had not yet confirmed. I called the Social Security Administration. I asked if there had been any change to my representative payee status, anyone designated to manage my benefits on my behalf. The representative told me that yes, 2 years earlier, a request had been filed to add a representative payee due to concerns about my ability to manage my own finances. The request had been approved. The representative payee listed was Thomas William Carver, my son. I had never been evaluated for mental capacity. I had never been declared incompetent. No doctor had ever signed a form saying I could not handle my own affairs. But somewhere, a form had been submitted, and it had been accepted, and no one had called me to verify it. The system had worked exactly as designed. Someone had told them I needed help, and they had believed it. I put the phone down. I walked out to the backyard. I stood under the oak tree that Linda and I had planted the year Thomas was born, a skinny sapling we had bought for $12 at the nursery on Highway 9. It was massive now, its branches spreading over half the yard. I had watched it grow for 39 years. I had watched my son grow for the same amount of time. And somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of what he was becoming. I made a decision that afternoon. I would gather every piece of evidence I had. I would organize it into a file, the way I had organized maintenance logs aboard the Kitty Hawk, the way I had organized everything in my life that mattered. I would not confront Thomas yet. I would not give him the chance to spin a story or destroy what was left. I would build my case, and when it was complete, I would take it to the authorities, not because I did not love my son, because I did. And because I had to stop him before he destroyed himself completely. But here is the thing about secrets. When you start pulling at one thread, others come loose. I discovered something in those records that I had not been looking for, something that changed everything I thought I knew about what had been happening in my own house. It was not just the money. It was never just the money. It was a second set of accounts, hidden inside the first. A series of transfers going back to the year after Linda died. Transfers to companies I did not recognize. Payments labeled consulting fees and administrative services that totaled more than $60,000. And when I traced the ownership of those companies, I found a name I never expected. The person who had been helping Thomas. The person who had designed the entire system. Her name was Elaine. She was the woman Thomas had been dating, and she was not who I thought she was. I had seen Elaine at Sunday dinners, at the occasional birthday gathering, always pleasant, always well-dressed, always with a way of asking questions that seemed like small talk until you looked back and realized she had mapped your entire life. She asked about my service. She asked about Linda. She asked about the house. She asked whether I had ever thought about moving somewhere with less upkeep. I had answered her honestly because I had no reason not to. I see now that every answer was data. She was not making conversation. She was conducting a needs assessment. I started with her name, Elaine Patricia Morrison. The name on the business registrations was slightly different, EP Morrison Consulting, but the registered agent address traced back to a townhouse 40 miles south of here in a development that had gone up maybe 10 years ago. I drove down there one weekday morning. I parked across the street and I watched. I was a retired sailor, not a private investigator, but I knew how to be patient. That was one thing the Navy had given me. Hour into my watch, she came out. Elaine. I recognized her immediately. She was wearing a blazer and carrying a leather briefcase. She got into a black sedan that was a few years old but clean, the kind of car that does not draw attention. I followed her at a distance, something I had not done since my 20s when I was young and stupid and trying to impress a girl by tailing her to the diner she worked at. This was different. This was the kind of thing that makes your hands tight on the wheel. She drove to an office park in another town, one of those places with identical 3-story buildings and signs for insurance agents and dental practices and one-man law firms. She parked in front of a suite with a sign that read Veterans Assistance and Benefits Planning. The logo looked official. The font was serious. The flags on either side of the sign were the American flag and a state flag, clean and crisp. If I had been an older veteran walking in there looking for help, I would have trusted it immediately. I did not go in. I took a photograph of the sign with my phone, something Thomas had taught me to do years ago when he still thought I needed help with simple technology. Then I drove home and I started searching. The business was not accredited by the VA. I called Mrs. Alvarez back and asked her to look it up. She told me that no entity under that name was registered with the Office of General Counsel as an accredited claims agent, attorney, or veterans service organization. She said that was a significant red flag. Unaccredited entities collecting money for benefits assistance were operating illegally. She said the VA had been cracking down on something called pension poaching, where bad actors convinced veterans to restructure their assets to qualify for benefits while pocketing massive fees. She said cases like mine had become increasingly common in the last several years. I asked her to run Elaine's name through whatever databases she had access to. She called me back the next day. Her voice was different now. She said she could not share everything, but she could tell me that Elaine Morrison had been the subject of 2 prior complaints from elderly veterans in another state. Both complaints alleged that she had befriended the veterans, gained access to their finances, and taken thousands of dollars in unauthorized fees. Neither complaint had resulted in criminal charges because both veterans had declined to testify. They were embarrassed. They were scared. One of them had died before the investigation concluded. I wrote that down on the same notepad with Linda's banana bread recipe. My hands were steady, but my chest was tight. This was not a woman who had seen an opportunity and grabbed it. This was a woman who had a method, a pattern, a career. The next thing I found was the marriage record. Elaine had been married twice before. Her first husband was a man named Gerald Stover, a retired Army sergeant who had served in Desert Storm. He died in 2017 at the age of 58. The death certificate listed the cause as heart failure. I could not find anything suspicious in the public record, but I thought about it for a long time. She had been with him for 6 years. He had owned a house and had a pension. I wondered if his family knew what had happened to his money. Her second marriage was even shorter. A man named Harold Chen, a widower in his late 70s, who she had met through a veterans charity event. They were married for 11 months before he filed for divorce, claiming financial fraud. The divorce was granted, but the criminal charges were dropped when Harold's health deteriorated and he moved into a nursing facility. He died a year later. I sat with those facts. I thought about Thomas. My son was not a master criminal. He was not a schemer. He was a man who had been through a divorce, who was vulnerable and lonely and had no money of his own. And into that gap had stepped Elaine, with her blazer and her briefcase and her questions about my house and my benefits. She had not just manipulated me, she had manipulated him. She had turned my son into the person who opened the credit cards and signed the line of credit. He was not innocent, but he was not the engineer. I needed to know how deep it went. I drove back to the office park the following week, this time on a Tuesday. I parked and I walked inside. The reception area was modest but professional. There were photographs on the wall of elderly men and women shaking hands with a younger woman, Elaine, I assumed, though her face was turned in most of them. There were brochures about VA benefits and estate planning and something called asset protection for seniors. There was a plaque that said, "Serving those who served." A young man at the front desk, maybe 25 years old, asked if I had an appointment. I said I did not. I said I was a veteran and I had received a letter about benefits assistance and I wanted to know more. He handed me a clipboard with a form. It asked for my name, my address, my date of birth, my branch of service, and my VA file number. It also asked for the name and contact information of my closest living relative. I filled in only my name and a fake address. I handed it back and said I would bring the rest next time. He seemed disappointed. Before I left, I took a mental inventory. There were 3 offices. The largest one at the end of the hall had a nameplate on the door, Elaine Morrison, Executive Director. The other 2 doors were open. One was an office with filing cabinets and a desk that looked unused. The other was a conference room with a whiteboard covered in diagrams. I could not read them from the hallway, but I could see enough to know they were flowcharts showing something moving from benefits to management services to disbursement. The same structure I had found in my own accounts. I went home and I called Howard. I had not spoken to Howard in years, but he had been my shipmate on the Kitty Hawk and he had gone on to become an attorney in private practice. He was not a criminal lawyer, but he knew how to listen. I told him everything. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Bill, you need to go to the police, and you need to go now." I said I was not ready. I said I was still building the case. He said I was not building a case. I was building a monument to my own hesitation. He said, "If you wait too long, she will figure out that you know, and she will disappear, and you will never get justice, and your son will be left holding the bag." I thought about that. I told him I would think about it. He said, "Don't think too long." That night I sat at the kitchen table with all my papers spread around me. The bank statements, the credit reports, the home equity line of credit, the business registrations for E.P. Morrison Consulting, the VA Inspector General's notes, the obituaries of 2 dead men who had shared a life with Elaine. I tried to see the whole picture, the way I used to look at a maintenance chart for a jet engine, every part connected, every function dependent on another. And then I saw something I had overlooked, a series of deposits into one of the hidden accounts. They were small, $500 here, $300 there. They came at irregular intervals. They came from different sources, all listed as benefits disbursement, with a transaction code I did not recognize. I cross-referenced the dates with the VA payment schedule. They did not match. These were not my benefits. These were someone else's. I thought about the flowcharts in the conference room. I thought about the brochures for asset protection. I thought about the young man at the front desk with his clipboard and his form asking for the name of my closest living relative, and I understood, finally, that I was not the only one. I was part of something larger. Elaine was not operating on me alone. She was managing a portfolio of veterans, and I was one of several. I called Mrs. Alvarez at the VA Inspector General's office first thing the next morning. I described the deposits. I gave her the transaction codes. She said she would look into it. She called me back that same afternoon, and for the first time, her professional calm cracked a little. She said, "Mr. Carver, those transaction codes correspond to 4 other veterans' benefit payments. 3 of them are in this state. 1 is across the border. All of them are elderly. All of them have family members listed as fiduciaries or representative payees. And every one of those family members has a connection, direct or indirect, to Elaine Morrison." I asked her what that meant. She said it meant the case was no longer just about me. It was now a multi-victim fraud investigation. She said agents would be assigned. She said there might be enough for a federal indictment. She said, "Mr. Carver, you should know that once we move on this, it will go fast, and your son will likely be charged as a co-conspirator. Are you prepared for that?" I was not prepared. I had spent 39 years protecting my son from scraped knees and bad decisions and the ordinary cruelties of the world. And now, I was about to hand him over to the federal government. But I had also spent 28 years serving my country, and my country had asked one thing of me in return: to tell the truth. I told Mrs. Alvarez I was ready. I hung up the phone and I looked at the notepad with Linda's handwriting. She had always been the stronger one, the one who knew when to be hard and when to be soft. I wished I could ask her what to do. I wished I could sit in this kitchen one more time and hear her say something sharp and true, but she was gone, and I was here, and I had a decision to make. I decided I would not hide what I was doing. I would tell Thomas directly, not because he deserved a warning, but because he was my son, and I owed him the chance to explain himself before the world fell on him. I called him and asked him to come over that Saturday. I said I wanted to talk. He said sure, and he sounded normal, the way a man sounds when he has no idea what is coming. Saturday came. I cleaned the kitchen and made coffee, and I set the folder on the table where he would see it when he sat down. And I waited for my son to arrive, knowing that after this day, nothing in our lives would ever be the same. Thomas pulled into the driveway at 10 minutes past 9. I watched him through the kitchen window as he sat in his car for a moment, looking at his phone, unaware that his entire life was about to change. He came in the side door the way he always did, calling out, "Dad, I'm here." His voice was light. He had no idea. I told him to sit down. He saw the folder on the table. He saw the coffee I had poured and not touched. He saw my face, and I saw the moment he knew. His expression did not crumble. It tightened the way a man tightens when he realizes the ground under him is not solid. I opened the folder. I laid out the bank statements with his signature forged on the account forms. I laid out the credit card applications with the post office box addresses. I laid out the home equity line of credit that used this house as collateral, the house his mother had painted 3 times because she could not find the right shade of yellow. I laid out the VA letter that had been intercepted, the representative payee form that had been approved without my knowledge, and the transaction records showing my disability payments diverted into accounts I had never seen. Then I placed the business registrations for E.P. Morrison Consulting on top of the stack, and I said, very quietly, "Tell me everything." Thomas did not speak for a long time. He stared at the papers. His hands were flat on the table, and I watched them tremble. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet. He said, "Dad, I can explain." I said, "I am listening." It came out in pieces. The divorce had left him with debts he could not pay. He had moved back home not just to help me after Linda died, but because he had nowhere else to go. He was working a job that barely covered his child support payments. He was sinking, and then he met Elaine at a veterans charity event. She was kind. She listened. She asked about his situation, about his father, about the benefits I received. She told him there were legal ways to restructure things, to protect the assets, to make sure the family was taken care of. She said she had helped dozens of veterans do the same. At first he believed her. He gave her access to my accounts because she said it was necessary for the planning. She showed him documents that looked official. She had business cards, a website, an office. She seemed legitimate. Then one day she brought him a form to add himself as a joint account holder. She said it was temporary. She said it was standard. He signed it. A few months later, she asked him to sign a change of direct deposit form. She said it would route the benefits through a protected account so they would be safe from creditors. He signed that too. I interrupted him. I said, "Did you ever ask her for proof? Did you ever call the VA yourself?" He looked down. He said, "No, I trusted her, and after a while I was in too deep to ask questions. She had records of everything I signed. She told me if I tried to stop, we would both go to prison. She said she would make sure I took the full blame." He paused. She said she had people who would back her up. I sat back in my chair. I thought about the flowcharts in the conference room, the other veterans, the system she had built. My son was not innocent, but he was not the architect either. He was a drowning man who had reached for a hand, and the hand that grabbed him back belonged to a predator. I told him about the VA investigation. I told him about Mrs. Alvarez and the transaction codes and the 4 other veterans whose benefits had been siphoned into Elaine's network. I told him that federal agents were preparing a case. I told him that if he cooperated fully, if he gave them everything he knew about Elaine and her operation, it might make a difference in how he was charged. It would not erase what he had done, but it might give him a chance to do something right. He asked me if I hated him. I said no. I said I was angry and I was hurt, and I was grieving the image of my son I had carried for 39 years. But I did not hate him. I said, "You are still my son. That does not change. But you are also a man who committed a crime, and men face consequences. That is what your mother would have said. That is what I am saying now." He put his head down on his arms on the kitchen table and he cried. Not the way a boy cries, but the way a grown man cries when he has been holding something inside for years. I did not move. I let him. I sat there and I watched the morning light come through the window, the same gold light that Linda loved, and I waited. 2 days later, Thomas met with the federal investigators. He gave them everything: bank records, emails, text messages, voice messages Elaine had left on his phone that he had not deleted because some part of him knew he might need them one day. He gave them the names of other veterans he had met through Elaine's office. He gave them the password to her business accounting software, which he had access to because she had made him manage the bookkeeping for several of the accounts. That evidence was the foundation of a federal indictment. Elaine Morrison was arrested at her office 3 weeks later. The agents found filing cabinets full of veterans' personal information, forged documents, and bank statements for accounts in the names of 12 elderly veterans across 3 states. They found a ledger that tracked monthly deposits, with notations about which family members could be pressured and which ones were asking questions. They found a folder on her computer labeled Exit Strategy that detailed a plan to liquidate everything and move to a country with no extradition treaty if anyone got too close. When the story broke, it made the local news, then the national news. The Department of Veterans Affairs put out a statement about protecting elderly veterans from pension poaching. The Inspector General cited the case as an example of the kind of fraud they were trying to root out. I was asked to speak at a hearing in Washington. I declined. I had already said what I needed to say. Elaine pleaded not guilty at first, but when the evidence was presented, when Thomas took the stand and testified against her, she changed her plea to guilty on 8 counts of wire fraud and 3 counts of aggravated identity theft. She was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. She will be 61 years old when she is released. Thomas pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Because of his cooperation, his sentence was reduced. He served 14 months in a federal facility, followed by 2 years of supervised release. He was also ordered to pay restitution, money that I know he will be paying for the rest of his life. I visited him once in prison. We sat in a visiting room with plastic chairs and a vending machine that hummed too loud. He looked thinner, he looked older, but his eyes were clearer than they had been in years. He said, "I am sorry, Dad, for all of it. I know that does not fix anything." I said, "No, it does not, but it matters." We talked about small things: the garden, the truck, the oak tree in the backyard. He asked if I was okay. I said I was learning to be, When I left, I shook his hand. I did not hug him. I was not ready for that yet, but I told him I would see him when he got out. That was 2 years ago. He is out now. He lives in a small apartment across town. He has a job at a warehouse. We talk on the phone once a week. It is not what it was before, and it may never be again, but it is something. After the trial ended, I spent a long time alone in this house. I sorted through papers. I cleaned out closets. One afternoon, I was going through a box of old files in the room Thomas used to sleep in. At the bottom, underneath a stack of his high school report cards and some faded photographs, I found a notebook. A cheap spiral notebook, the kind you buy at the drugstore for $1. The cover was worn. The pages were filled with his handwriting. It was a record, every transaction, every transfer, every dollar he had taken from me over the years. Not the polished version, not the version Elaine kept. His version, the numbers were precise, and next to each entry in the margin he had written small notes. Pay back when job starts. One day we will fix this. Dad doesn't know, please don't let him ever know. The last page was dated a week before I sat him down at the kitchen table. It said, I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to tell him, I am so sorry. I read that notebook sitting on the edge of the bed in the room where my son had slept as a boy. I thought about the weight he had been carrying, the spiral he had been caught in, the silence that had grown between us like a wall. I thought about Linda and what she would have said, and how she would have wept reading those words, and then she would have gotten up and done something about it. I put the notebook in a drawer. I did not burn it. I did not throw it away. I kept it because it was evidence of something I needed to remember, that my son was not a monster. He was a man who made terrible choices, and he paid for them, and he would keep paying for them. But underneath all of it, there was still the boy who had sat on my lap and asked me to tell him stories about the aircraft carrier. That boy was still in there somewhere. I sat on the porch that evening and I watched the sun go down behind the oak tree. The lower branches still needed trimming. I had never gotten around to it. I thought about everything that had been taken from me and everything I had done to take it back. I thought about the other veterans, the ones who never found out, the ones who died not knowing what had been stolen from them. I thought about the system that made it possible for a woman like Elaine to operate for years without being stopped. And I thought about what comes next, not just for me, but for every veteran who trusts someone with their benefits, every elderly person who signs a form they do not fully understand, every son or daughter who is standing at the edge of a decision they can never take back. Because this story is not over. It is still happening right now to someone who does not know it yet. And the question is not whether it will happen again. The question is who will stop it. Part of the answer is the system itself. The Department of Veterans Affairs processes billions of dollars in benefits every year, and the mechanisms that exist to protect veterans from fraud rely on a single assumption that someone will speak up. But the people who are most vulnerable are often the least likely to call. They are isolated, they are trusting, they are ashamed when they realize what has happened, and the people who steal from them know all of this. They count on it. In the years since Elaine Morrison was sentenced, the VA has strengthened its oversight of fiduciaries and representative payees. They have created new reporting tools. They have run public awareness campaigns about pension poaching and benefits fraud. But the core vulnerability remains the same. No system can fully protect a person from someone they trust. That is not a failure of policy. It is a truth about human relationships. There are things you can do. If you are a veteran, or if you have a veteran in your family, check your beneficiary information regularly. Call the VA Benefits Hotline once a year just to confirm that your direct deposit is going to the right place. Read every letter the VA sends you, even the ones that look like junk mail. If someone offers to help you manage your benefits, ask for their VA accreditation number. If they do not have one, do not give them access. And if something feels wrong, say something. The number is 1-800-827-1000. Someone will answer. I am still learning what it means to trust people again. I am not there yet. I may never fully be there. But I have learned that silence is not the same thing as safety. It is the opposite. Silence is the space where these things grow. I stayed quiet about my finances for decades because that was how I was raised. You do not talk about money. You do not show what you have. That instinct served me in many ways, but it also created the gap that Elaine exploited. I will not make that mistake again. The other veterans in Elaine's network did not get the same ending I did. 2 of them died before she was arrested. One of them, a widower in his 80s who had served in Korea, lost his house because he did not know a lien had been placed against it until the bank came to foreclose. His daughter is still fighting that in court. Another veteran, a woman who served as a nurse in Desert Storm, had her entire disability payment rerouted for 6 years. She lives now with her sister in a one-bedroom apartment, and she is waiting for restitution that may never fully come. These are not just stories, these are people, and for every case that makes the news, there are 5 more that never get reported because the victim is too embarrassed to come forward, because they blame themselves, because they cannot bear to see their own child or their own caregiver in handcuffs. I understand that feeling. I almost let it stop me. If I had not found that first bank statement, if I had not called the VA that morning, I might be one of those silent cases right now. But here is what I want you to take from this. It is not hopeless. There are people inside the VA, inside law enforcement, inside advocacy organizations who have dedicated their careers to stopping exactly this kind of fraud. They are underfunded and overworked, but they are there, and they need you to speak up. They can only act on what they know. I think about my son a lot. I think about what he did, and I think about why he did it. I think about the notebook I found in his old room with his careful accounting of every dollar he took and every promise he made to himself to pay it back. I do not forgive him because he wrote those words, but I understand him better because of them. He was caught between a predator who knew how to manipulate him and a father who never taught him how to talk about the hard things. I failed him in that way, and he failed me in every other way. Both of those things are true. The oak tree in my backyard still needs its lower branches trimmed. I still have not done it. Maybe I will get to it this spring. Maybe I will hire someone. I have learned that some things are worth doing yourself and some things are worth asking for help. That is a lesson I wish I had learned sooner. If you are watching this and you think something might be wrong with your benefits or your parents' benefits or your neighbor's benefits, do not wait. Do not assume someone else will handle it. Do not let embarrassment or fear keep you quiet. Make the call, check the records, ask the questions. The people who built this country deserve better than to spend their final years being stolen from in silence. Thank you for listening to this story. If it meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have a story of your own, tell us in the comments. We are listening. That is how we stop it.